Hello and welcome. Woody Allen, writer, director, actor, and occasional clarinet player. Now, movie fans either love him or hate him. It mostly depends on your own taste in humour. But whatever your thoughts about him, he's written and directed a diverse array of award-winning films. Woody's been nominated 19 times for Oscars, winning 4 in a career spanning more than 5 decades. I tried for 3 years to get an interview with Woody on my way back to Australia from the Cannes Film Festival. Then, in 1986, asleep in a Florida hotel on a Saturday afternoon, prepping for an all-night shoot on a John Malkovich film, I was woken by his PR from New York calling to confirm he'd see me for half an hour on Monday, and could I make it? Well, I turned up at his Manhattan edit suite and was reminded he was very busy and I definitely only had 30 minutes. We ended up chatting for almost an hour. Woody had just finished Hannah and Her Sisters, and by that stage in his career already had a string of iconic hit movies on his credit list, including Annie Hall, Manhattan, Stardust Memories, Interiors, and The Purple Rose of Cairo. But in those days, there was no instant Googling the internet for up-to-date information for the interview, so I started at the beginning and tried to find out how gag writing for a local newspaper got him into the movies.
Was it even inevitable, do you think, when you were young, that eventually you would make films? I mean, was that a fairly clear image?
No, it didn't seem inevitable to me. I was not that interested in it professionally. I was interested in being a playwright. And when I got to be 19 or so, and I was writing for television, and I wanted to just write for the theater. That's all that interested me. And I only got into films circuitously. I wrote play before I wrote a film, and I just I was hired to write a film, which was What's New Pussycat, but I never even count that because that was just like being hired to write a television show. I mean, I had no interest in it, and I did it, and they paid me, and but I just wanted to write for the theater. That's all that interested me. And then I wrote something for the theater, and I wrote this film script, and because I had a negative experience on What's New Pussycat, I decided that unless I could direct the film, I wasn't even going to bother to make it. I mean, I didn't care enough about it even. And coincidentally, they let me direct it because there was a new company at the time, and they were hard up for directors.
But you were influenced by films, though, weren't you, in your youth? I mean,
Yes, I always loved them, but I never thought of doing. I loved films when I grew up personally, and I never went to the theater. But by the time I was 19 and 20 years old, we looked down at films. Now, again, I grew up loving them, and as I say, I never went to the theater till I was in my late teens. No one ever took me to the theater, my family or anything. But when I started learning about theater, we looked down on films because American films were nothing. They were what if you look back at the American movies of the 1950s, and I mean, they were junky, and films had the reputation. I mean, and theater, you had Tennessee Williams and Arthur Miller, and people of distinction.
Some of the greats.
Yeah, but nothing in films. So I couldn't care less about films when I got older, and then only got into them. And then the reverse happened. Then the theater became a tourist trap, and
on Broadway.
Yeah, oh yeah, it's just the worst. And films, you suddenly, with more freedom, American filmmakers could do more mature films, better films.
That almost coincided with the breaking up, if you like, of the studio influence.
Mm-hmm.
The great studio
Mm-hmm.
influence. Is that right? It was about that time that.
I think so. I think the studio influence was, people nostalgic for their own childhood will say, oh, they just don't make films the way they used to, and all those great Katharine Hepburn films and all those great, Spencer Tracy and Humphrey Bogart. And there's no question that, those personalities were wonderful. But 95% of the thousands and thousands of films that Hollywood made over the years, 99% were silly films. They were not good. And even many of the ones that had all these wonderful people in them, many of the film, if you look at the films of Fred Astaire and the films of, they're dopey films, distinguished by his genius as a dancer.
Yeah.
And the Bogart films and the Cagney films and the Clark Gable films, most of them are awful. But these people were wonderful, wonderful people, and occasionally a good film would be made. Not much though. And so, in the studio times, they were grinding them out, you know, 50 a month or something.
Yes,
I mean,
it was extraordinary. Yeah.
yeah, and they were just sort of vacuous movies to keep people escaped and amused, diverted.
So in that youth where you were going to the movies and you were enjoying obviously going to the
Hmm.
movies, I mean, were there things that you particularly liked that I suppose subconsciously might have influenced you later on?
Well, as a kid, I very much liked the same stuff that everyone else liked. I mean, I loved, Cagney and Bogart and the Marx Brothers and all that. As I got to be an adolescent, when I got to be, 15 or so, they opened up in my neighborhood a foreign film house. And then I saw good films. I mean, and I did think that those were wonderful.
Do you remember the first ones that you saw?
I remember when I saw The Bicycle Thief and Grand Illusion and, you know, um, La Ronde and the early Jacques Tati. And, I mean, I do remember those things. And I thought they were clearly superior to the American films, in my opinion. Now, it's true that we only imported the best, of the foreign films. But the best of the foreign films were better than the best of the American films, and they were better than what we saw of the French and the Italians, which is better than our films. I mean, if you saw things by, De Sica and Fellini and the early Bergman films, they were just superior.
I get the impression that in your family group that you were probably the most conscious of what was happening outside in the arts and all of that sort of thing.
Right.
Was
My
a
family
prime
was not
mover.
interested in any of that. They just, to this day, both my parents are still alive, and they have very little interest in that. They just wasn't on their minds ever.
What about now in terms of what you've done? Obviously, they must be proud and interested in
Yes,
your work.
they are, but not in any communicative way. I mean, they're proud that I'm their son and that the films have succeeded, and they go and enjoy it or say they enjoy it, But they're still not, film buffs, or
Mm.
they almost never ever go to the theater. They never will go to a museum or read a book. It's just not in the family.
Does that disappoint you at all?
It doesn't disappoint me. As I look back, I wonder what it would have been like had I come from a family that had a higher value on culture. But I didn't. I mean, there was just nobody. Where I grew up, all you did was play ball and, you know, play hooky and play ball and, start fires.
But perhaps it served in another way to motivate you in a greater sense. That you didn't have this, and once you began to found it, you discovered that there was so much out there that you kept looking for.
Right, I did like it when I discovered it. Now, and I don't know what would have happened. I don't know had my parents have taken me to the theater when I was 5 or 7 or 10 or something, if I would have suddenly, been spellbound by it, or not. I just don't know. But I didn't. I never had that opportunity.
I just suspect sometimes when people are spoon-fed things, they don't really appreciate them.
This is possible. This is possible because I always envy kids that grew up in Manhattan. I grew up in Brooklyn, which is a suburb. But kids that grew up in Manhattan, I always feel, gosh, you were so lucky. You'd come home from school and you had 100 movies and theaters around you and museums, and not all of them understand that. Not all of them seem to realize, yes, I was lucky. So what?
Yeah, so it was there. It was,
Yeah.
right. Probably like their parents. Their parents were always there. They just took them for granted.
Right. They just take it for granted.
So what was the path then that got you? I mean, you became aware of the theatre. You became a gag writer for television. So that seems to be kind of a diversion away from theatre.
Right, because I felt this. I became a gag writer for radio and television when I was about 16 years old, just turning 17, and I felt, you know, I'm going to write a play one day, but I didn't feel ready to write one, and I knew it was something I wanted to learn about, but while I was doing it, it was sort of fun and lucrative to write for nightclub comedians, for television, because I found myself in a position to earn a substantial amount of money and to actually write and hear my jokes done and all that by comedians and write shows on television, and it was, you know, the frightening thing always was you didn't want to be trapped in it. You didn't want to look up 20 years later and say, God, I'm still here.
Yeah.
You wanted to do it and get out of it and get on to the theater. But I never thought of getting, you know, I remember asking Abe Burrows, who was a Broadway playwright with Guys and Dolls and a number of things. Um, I remember when I was about 20, I said to him, isn't everybody on Broadway just writing their plays, you know, and dying to get to Hollywood? Is that what it is? And he said, no, it's nothing like that. People in Hollywood are dying to get a play on Broadway. Because in those days, with the studio system, the Hollywood people were hacks. You know, the writers just wrote what they were told, and other people would rewrite their work, and they all wanted the freedom of writing a play. But now that's changed to a large degree, although, you know, only, let's say, half changed, because there are still a lot of restrictions and problems. I don't have them now, and there are a few lucky people that don't have them. You know, I say lucky because I don't know what determines that. It just seems if you behave like an artist, they treat you like one or something. You know, with for no good reason. People.
Yeah, after you achieve a certain level of success, though, I mean, below that.
I guess so. They, you know, and so it's just good luck. But I do know that even without the studio system very much, still people have got to submit their scripts to stars, and the star wants to change it, and the star's agent wants to change it, and the producer, and it's really, you know, not a good thing. And that's why there are very few good films made. I mean, you know,
given the number that I made.
Yeah, and there used to be the number was never any higher. I mean, there used to be like many more films made quantitatively. You know, now we sit back and we watch, and we say, gee, look at all those wonderful old Mickey Rooney films, and look at all those, you know, they were very silly films, like television shows. They were just formula films, like, you know. But yes, it is wonderful to look at them because we grew up on them, and it's nostalgic, and we love Mickey Rooney because he was talented and all. But the films were all pretty bad.
What do you think that period of writing, the gag writing, gave you in terms of A, understanding of comedy, and B, just the writing side of it, the craft of writing?
I did learn the craft of writing by having to write sketches. You know, when I first I used to write just one-liners, just jokes for comedians to say. And then when I got into television, the demands were that you had to write, you know, half-hour shows and 5-minute sketches and things. And I had to learn, you know, how to actually structure things, how to, you know, introduce a premise and a conflict quickly, and develop it, and have it go someplace, and have it resolve itself, and that was definitely craft that had to be learned. But once you learn that, then, you know, it's like learning to drive or something. You don't think about it anymore. You just automatically do it, and don't always do it as acutely as you do when you first start. You know, I mean, I guess if a painter paints, you know, first you learn to paint, and then you can do abstractions. But you always know how to, and I had to learn. I mean, I had to be taught how to do it.
So
I mean,
was it trial and error, or were there other writers who said, no, look, you know, what you should be doing here is, you know, making this character more this or less that? And
I was helped a lot by Neil Simon's brother, Danny Simon. They were a famous comedy writing team, and they broke up, and Neil had gone on to write plays, to start to write plays. And Danny was sort of bereft, and he was looking around for someone to collaborate because he had collaborated his whole life. And then he found me, and thought that I was a very good comedy writer, that I had, you know, talent for writing funny things, but knew nothing about how to go about it. And so he teamed up with me for a while, and I learned an awful lot from him. If I had not met him, I think I would have learned from trial and error. I can't guarantee I would have, but I think I would have learned from trial and error. But he cut the time down for me by light years.
What is the premise of comedy? I mean, it's laughing at other people's misfortunes, I suppose, is one thing. It's surprise, things that happen that we don't
when you say the
expect
premise
to
of comedy, by premise, I don't mean of comedy. I mean just how to structure something.
Right.
Just how to introduce the characters and get things moving quickly, and ignite a conflict quickly, and see that conflict is not just something that peters out rapidly, but that develops into something. You know, you could use the same structure in drama just as well. It's just that's the craft part of it.
So then what makes it funny? I mean, what
What
is...
makes it funny is there are certain people that have an instinct for characterizing phenomena in an amusing way, and I can do that. There's a certain amount of people that can just do it. You know, you just hear some, not they're not always professionals. I mean, sometimes you just hear someone, a relative or something, that's just great at telling a story, or great at, you know, they just have a and and if I describe something, or I have a tendency to experience it from an amusing perspective. I immediately see something funny about it, or that's my tendency, and so there are a certain amount of people that can do that.
Um, you were talking about the independence, or at least wanting to direct your own picture, and that's how you understood you were going to be able to do it best of all. Where, with which picture did you really become autonomous, do you think?
Right away. The first one that I ever wrote was What's New Pussycat,
Yeah.
and they just saw me in a nightclub and asked me to write it, and I wrote it, and someone else directed it, and other people, and I just was shunted aside completely, and I felt that they ruined the picture. It became a tremendous success the minute it opened, and it was at its time the biggest money-earning comedy in history. And I hated every second of it, and as I say, vowed I would never work in film again. If and my very first film, Take the Money and Run, I was completely autonomous on it. They were just wonderful to me. They were a new film company called Palomar, and they as I say, they were hard up for directors. And I had a low budget, but they never gave me an ounce of problem from some, I just did whatever. And I've always been completely autonomous on every film I've ever done. I've now done about 15 films. I've never had any problem at all. I
No pressure. And Orion, obviously, yeah.
Orion used to be United Artists, as
Yeah.
you know, the same
in people
people.
terms.
And, I've never had any problem. I mean, I do the ideas that I want. I cast who I want. I take the time that I need. The one thing that is restrictive are my budgets.
To
I mean,
what degree?
well, over the years, I've always worked with very reasonable budgets. Once in a great while, I'll go to them with an idea and say, I need an outlandish budget for this. It's right. And they'll either say yes or no. And if they say yes, then I'm completely autonomous again. And if they say no, we don't want to spend that much money on a film, then I can't. But over the years, I've had to watch my budgets, which is fine.
Because I'd like to get onto it a little bit later and talk to you about the reshooting approach that you have, which I think is quite interesting. But do you see, looking back at the 15 films that you've made, that you've charted a course, if you like, a graph almost in cycles, if you like, that you've sort of...
I think I definitely, they're definitely different now than they were. When I first started, I was very influenced by and interested in Marx Brothers style films. Just fast, relentless comedy. Just crash as quickly as you could, and that's all that I did. I couldn't care how they looked. I didn't care, but whether they made sense or not. Just so the audience would come in, sit down, and I hoped, and if I was ideally successful, that they would laugh for an hour and a half and go home. And that's all I tried to do. And then along around Annie Hall, I started to want to try and be sacrifice a little less funny, and try and develop characters more and get the people more interested in the story, so that if there weren't gags going on, they would be interested in the characters and their predicament. And since then, that's what I've tried to do is films with story. I've tried to. I'm not saying I've achieved it, but I've tried to deepen my work so that it's not just comedy, so that there's some substance to it. I mean, when I'm not comedy, but not just laughter, so that there's some feeling to it and some substance to it, so you could leave the theater and feel, yes, it was a comedy, but it was about something, and I cared about the people, and I cried for a minute or something. So it's more of an experience. I tried doing a very serious film once, which was Interiors, and I'd like to try that again. I mean, I think that's where I'd like to move. Really, is to the abandonment of comedy for a period of time and just moved to serious films. Um, I did it only with Interiors and just flirted with it to a small degree with Stardust Memories, but just a little bit. That was still a comedy. And then did it again a little bit with Hannah. Half the film. I mean, if you took my half of the film out, the stuff with Michael Caine and Max von Sydow and Barbara Hershey and the other people are more dramatic. And what I'd like to do are a series of films that are serious dramas for adults. Hopefully, if I can make them good, good ones.
Were you satisfied with Interiors?
I wasn't satisfied with it because I can't say I've ever been satisfied with every film I've made has been a tremendous disappointment to me, and that
Really?
yeah, tremendous, and that no different. It was the best I could do at the time. I didn't feel that I took the easy way out, or I you know did I wrote down to anybody, or I did something, but no, if I had it to do over, I would do it differently. And the same with all of my films. I've never felt good about any of them,
Including the last three?
including the last three. Uh, First of all, I remember when Manhattan was about to come out, which was a big hit for me at the time. I was thinking of a way, if I could, to offer United Artists to do a free film for them if they would not release it. If there was some way I could buy it back or something, but there was no way I could because it cost several $1,000,000 to make, and I don't have that kind of money to spend on a film. And I was trying to figure out some way. And then it came out. It was very successful, but I feel between the initial conception of a film, when I'm sitting in this room or home in my apartment, I have some great thought, and I just think it's wonderful. When I start, into reality with it, then it starts losing its luster. I start ruining it. It's great when if it's one line in your mind, but when you start writing it, you lose a little, and then you cast it and you lose a little, and then you shoot it and you don't execute it quite well. By the time it comes out, it's not this idealized, brilliant notion. It's something that you've realized, if you're lucky, 50% of, and you always feel, oh, it was such a great idea, and look what I did with it. And this has happened to me on every single film.
With Annie Hall as well?
Oh, absolutely. With Annie Hall was a film that was made in the reshoots. I mean, when I first looked at the first draft of Annie Hall, and I showed it to Marshall Brickman, who co-wrote it with me. He hadn't seen anything, and I showed it to him. He said, it's incoherent. I mean, I wrote the script with you, and I can't follow the story. And I reshot, I mean, 60% of that picture is reshoots. And the same with Hannah, the same with, every picture that I've had. I've never been able to get it really where I wanted it. So, in long-winded answer to your question, I was disappointed with Interiors, no more so than, or less than with any of them.
One of the aspects, I mean, what you've done in Australia is to have entire dinner parties spend a whole evening debating and analysing not only the film but Woody Allen. The filmmaker. They've never met you. They feel that they've met you through the pictures, and they. Mm-hmm. I mean, I know. I've been at those dinner parties.
And what is the premise? Because that I don't want to do comedy, or that?
No. They're just because I think. I mean, particularly with films where you began to become more serious, mm-hmm. and where you began to explore the relationships and frustrations mm-hmm. of characters and so on. Then with that came people's curiosity, and you mm-hmm. provoked them. Essentially, did you set out to do that? I mean, was that
no, not at all. What I've wanted to do, my game plan, if I had any, was to, once I decided to get into film, was I wanted to go into film, and I wanted to develop from a maker of comic films to a maker of dramatic films. And when I first started making films, the only thing I could rely on that I knew of was comedy and jokes. So my early films are motored by jokes because when in doubt, I could always fall back on a joke, and it got me past, not a relationship or anything, just a joke. And then I got more adventurous about them, but what I'd like to do if my game plan ran true, if I really am able to realize, what I dream about, would be to now be able to make a series of serious films that are not comic. I don't mean that they have to be solemn films, but dramatic films that uh, work very well with an audience. That they people can come in and can really have a good dramatic experience, and that would be wonderful.
Along with the development of what you've been making, so also there's been a development, I think, in your attitude towards women, and the way when you seem to cherish them, you put them on a pedestal.
Hmm.
They're the central characters of films.
Hmm.
What are you aware of a change yourself in your attitudes towards women?
Well, I've always gotten along well with women. I've mentioned this before to people. I'm the only male in my family. I have a sister, and my mother had 7 sisters, and they all gave birth to girls. And so I was, in a very large family that lived within 5 blocks. Everyone lived within 5 blocks. I was the only male in the family, so I grew up with a lot of girls. And I've always gotten along well with them and like them, and um, appreciate them, and also feel more comfortable writing about them dramatically. I mean, I could never, you know, write a drama, I don't think, about 3 brothers. It's just be an odd thing. I mean, maybe I could try it sometime as an exercise, but it doesn't feel
Mm.
natural. I mean, I just can't imagine not writing, for women, unless it's, I can write for myself, and usually in a comic way. I mean, I don't think I could write anything dramatic for myself. I can write for myself, but usually I feel more comfortable writing female characters.
But do you think your attitude has changed towards women? I mean, particularly I guess over the last 12 years. So
I, I I don't know. It's too hard a question. I mean,
you're not conscious of it.
I'm not conscious of it. No.
I just thought it might have been part of the motivation for the various films that you began to see women's relationships in different lights.
But my feeling about them, I don't know if my feeling has changed necessarily. I mean, I'm not conscious of my own feeling change. This may have happened without me knowing it. I mean, possibly as I get older, you know, one's feelings do change, and you hopefully view people of the opposite sex with more maturity. When you're
Yes.
younger, you think it's just getting them into bed as quickly as possible. You know what I mean? And not relating to them because you're so driven by your physical impulses. And it's possible as you get older, you deepen and can appreciate. You're not so blinded by sexual lust, and you can appreciate you know other things. This is possible.
Does that also mean that you can understand them better as well, do you think?
This I don't know. I hope so, but I don't know.
Do you think you
Um,
understand women generally?
I understand some of them. I mean, I've had relationships with some that I feel I understand. I don't think they're that different than men in a certain way. I mean, there's a lot of men that I don't understand. I mean, there's just the added element with women that they're a different sex. So you tend to think of them in an exotic way, and I guess they think of men in a more exotic way.
Mm.
They feel at home with their girlfriends, and guys feel at home with their boyfriends, and but there's but in the end, everybody wants more or less the same thing. If you really get down to it, whether it's a man or a intellectual woman or a prostitute or a poor man or a successful man. I mean, when you really tap all the way down, everybody's after more or less the same thing.
Love, I guess.
Yes, good, deep relationship with a single person. Hopefully, that's fulfilling to them, and yeah, I think everybody wants that. If they could have it, ideally, they would like to have. Even the most promiscuous men that I know, these real New York bachelors who just have women coming in.
You
and
mean
out
they
of-
really exist?
Yeah, I know some of them. I know some that do exist, and I think at least they say that they want one deep relationship with, and you don't know whether they're just saying that. I mean, they think it themselves, and they're just saying it, or whether um, whether they really do. But they certainly purport to.
But you've never married,
Yes, I have. I married twice. I married when I was 19 years old.
did you?
Yes, I was married to a schoolgirl,
Local girl?
local schoolgirl. We married for 5 years, and she was very nice. She went on when I was married with her. Went through college and became a philosophy teacher. And then I was married to Louise Lasser, who was in Bananas for about 2 years. We went together for about 8 years before that, and we decided to get married for about two. We decided to get married, and it lasted about 2 years.
Right. Yeah, I didn't realise that.
Yeah.
I didn't, yeah. Would you get married again, do you think? I mean, do you see that as something in your life that you need at all?
I would hope not to have to go through the legal ritual again, because I don't think that I think that's foolish. I've been seeing Mia Farrow now for 6 years, and we're not married, nor do we even live together. Um, and I would hope that if that relationship remains as the definitive one of my life, that that we never have to consummate it legally, whether we live together or not, because the I'm suspect of the legality of it. I mean, it
I know what you mean.
it seems silly, either it's good or it's not good, and the act of signing the piece of paper,
Exactly.
doesn't enhance it.
If you really love each other, do you really need to
Yeah, you're together because you want to be, not because you signed a deal.
Just as an observation, and certainly not as a question, she must be an extraordinary woman. I didn't realise until the last couple of years that she had adopted all the kids and looks after those
Yeah,
kids
she's
as well as
amazing.
having her own. I mean, just
She's
quite
amazing. She's got 8 kids, and has no compunction at all. In fact, will adopt handicapped kids and foreign kids, and kids. She's adopted kids that with adoption people told her that they thought these kids would never be coherent, that they were so damaged and riddled with sores, and their brains were not good. I mean, just the word, and just through excessive skill at mothering and tremendous amount of love and indulgence, the kind of thing that Bruno Bettelheim, recommends for psychotic patients. They're all wonderful kids, and they're functioning normally, and they're going to school and getting good marks, and but that's her great talent in life. I think I think even more than an actress, she's interested in that. Acting is like she likes it, but she's not incredibly dedicated to it. She would be just as happy raising kids the rest of her life, and it wouldn't matter to her if she acted or not.
She sounds like a saint, actually.
Yeah, she has a very definite Mother Teresa complex. I mean, to the point where Mother Teresa came to town and was lecturing at the United Nations, she took all her kids to see her, and this has always been one of her idols. And she's got all her books, and she's very, very, and she's not religious at all, but she's very, very humanitarian in that way. I mean, it was such a surprise for me when I first met her, because that was not what attracted me to her. I mean, it's a noble thing, but I mean, I thought she was an interesting person and an actress, and we had a lot to talk about and all that. But her big contribution in life is this Mother Teresa thing she has.
Have you become a kind of almost like a stepdad to the 8 kids?
Yeah, I'm relied on by some of them more than others. I mean, I'm friendly with all of them, but there are a few of them that have gravitated to me because of their needs, I guess, more than others. So I do spend a lot of time with them, and then she's got this new baby, which is only 10 months old now, that of course I feel very close to, because I was in on this particular adoption.
How do you feel being a stepdad? I mean, are you good? Are you good at it?
Oh, I'm very good at it. I mean, I love kids. I mean, but it's funny. I always had a very casual attitude about it. I always felt it was up to the woman I was with. the wife or the woman wanted a kid, that was fine with me. I was perfectly prepared to do it and raise it. If she wanted 5 kids, that's okay with me. I don't mind that. I come from, families that were big and always living together. If she wanted no kids and never, that would be fine with me too. I could easily see my life not having a single child without it bothering me. And that's the way it's worked out. I had no interest, one way or the other. And Mia suddenly came as a package with 7 kids. That was perfectly fine. And now there's an 8th, and but I like kids.
Yeah, that's great. The last 3 films have sort of, to me, have been, as I was talking about a graph or a cycle, how you like it, seems to be the beginning of another cycle. I'm talking about Purple Rose of Cairo, Broadway Danny Rose, and now Hannah. Do you see that as there seems to be a change? I mean, you've gone more into the storytelling side of things with a lighter sort of touch, if you like. Yeah, I think they're all much more accessible than perhaps some of the films in the previous 5 or 6 years. I mean, to a broad audience.
Yes. I think this is true. I mean, I didn't do this on purpose, but I think it's true. I think Danny Rose and Purple Rose and this picture are more accessible, and they are more stories. I think one thing that I do notice about them is that there's in all of them, to varying degrees, though they're comedies, an element of sadness. And I'm trying to, that's the element that I want to develop the most. I mean, they're, let's say, more serious as comedies, or have more touching moments in them if they work, than earlier ones. And I would hope that, this is bringing me to the end of my journey where I want to go, and that is to films that are all serious, and whatever comedy is in them is the comic relief, but that the films are not comic films.
I think the other element that is just, I think it's certainly been in most of your films, but I think it's more evident in those 3, is a warmth as well in the characters. They seem a little less troubled in themselves, and a little more open, and therefore a little warmer.
Right, I would certainly say that would be true about Danny Rose and Purple Rose. In Hannah, some of them are still sort of self-troubled. I do think some of them are. But you see, I like that. I like self-troubled characters because the artists that I like over the years have always written about tortured characters. I mean, I like Chekhov and Tennessee Williams and Arthur Miller and Strindberg, and these are the people that interest me. Eugene O'Neill, and those characters. In the United States, you always get these ridiculous kind of criticisms that people have. They'll say, "Well, he's always writing about neurotic characters," but what does that mean? I mean, Shakespeare only wrote about neurotic characters, and so did Eugene O'Neill, and so did Strindberg, and so did Tennessee Williams. And I remember this criticism about Tennessee Williams years ago. They said, "Well, I don't like to go see his plays because the characters are always so sick." And but that's what's interesting. I mean, what's interesting about Stanley Kowalski and Blanche and and Hamlet and all is that they're disturbed characters, and that's what's fun about them. So. I like that, and I would like to be able to, as I say, do, deeper films, more serious films, where the comedy just is an occasional relief from a more driving sense of drama.
When you say serious, what would you geographically broaden your range? I mean, move out of New York, do films that were...
And that's tough for me. I wish I could. That would be the step along the way if I feel I can handle that. That's a tough one for me. I know I've restricted myself tremendously by working in New York, and it's been more costly for me, and it's been restrictive. But in order to make places look like they're not just New York, or to have some scope. I mean, Purple Rose is a little town in New Jersey. in an effort to do that. I mean, I've stayed right in the tri-state area here, and I do think it's restrictive, and I do think, maybe someday I'll be able to leave New York and make films. I don't know.
Why can't? I mean, what is it? What is the stumbling block? What is the hurdle?
I like being home. I like getting up in the morning and not having to go that far to shoot, and to be home. I don't like the idea. I used to be on the road a lot, both as a nightclub comic and when I started making films. And every year I'd make a film, I find myself like doing, a picture in San Francisco, and I'd say, well, gee, I don't really like this. I'm living in a hotel, and I'm not home for 6 months, and I don't feel comfortable at this. And then an idea would come to me, and I'd say, like Sleeper, I'd say, well, it's a great idea. I want to do it. I got to go to Colorado. I know that. And I said, this is the last time I'll be out there in a motel in Colorado for 6 months, and I'll say, I'm never going to do this again. And then I come back, I start writing a film, and it turns out to be Love and Death, and that took me to Hungary, to Budapest, and that was the turning point for me, because I had kept going back on my own word a number of times and always regretting it. And I was in Budapest, and I said, this is ridiculous. I'm never going to make a film out of New York again. And I never did after that. And I just like getting up and going within, 30 blocks or 50 blocks of where I live and working.
You're lazy.
I mean, yeah, it is partially that, and partially not wanting to be inconvenienced, wanting to be able to sleep in my own bed at night and eat in my restaurants and eat home, and and so it's restrictive to me. I mean,
It's just that I think you're one filmmaker who should tackle we describe. I mean, more global issues, if you like. I mean, some political issues and that sort of thing that reach. Global issues, I suppose, are intimate issues as well, because they apply everywhere around the world. We can all identify with them.
Right. If I had the nerve to leave the, there are ideas that I've had in recent years that would require going, and I've always, put them on the back burner, and it's hard for me to. I hope that someday I'll be able to do that, But right now, I mean, I'm in the process. I just finished a film which I shot in New York.
Right. Can you talk a little bit about that? You haven't got a title for it.
I don't have a title yet, but I can tell you a little about it. It's a completely different kind of film than Hannah. Completely. For one thing, I'm not in it, and there is no ostensible star of it. It's got a very big cast, and everybody has a little tiny role.
Who are some of the people?
Mia is in it. Diane Wiest of Hannah. Tony Roberts has a tiny part. Jeff Daniels has a tiny part. Diane Keaton sings a song in it. Julie Kavanaugh. There's a whole lot of people that I've worked with over the years. Danny Aiello has a little thing in it. But no starring role, and it's almost like a musical because it has so much music in it. But it isn't a musical. But it's almost like, and it takes place in the mostly in the 1940s. Although a little of it 5 minutes of it takes place in the 20s and 30s, but almost all of it takes place in the 40s, and it's a much lighter, broader comic piece, that's.
What is the essence of the plot?
It doesn't have a plot. It's a series of incidents. It doesn't have a plot to it. It's a series of incidents that are bound together by music, mostly.
Very quickly, the inspiration for Hannah was a long-held sort of curiosity about sisters' relationships.
Two things, yeah. That I had always wanted to do something on that subject, and then one summer I was reading Anna Karenina again, and I started to think, this would be a great structure for a movie where you see some characters and then you go away from them and other characters and then back to those and then other characters and and because that was the structure of the novel, and I thought this would be a good way to do some of these separate themes that I had thoughts about. I had always wanted to do something about a guy who's intensely worried that he's mortally sick all the time, and and I'd always wanted to do something about a guy who falls in love with his sister's husband. And I had thought of making separate movies about some of these subjects, but here I got the idea to combine them, and it worked out for me.
Interesting casting. I mean, Michael Caine was sort of out of left field, if you like. I mean, he's not a
Right.
New York actor. You hadn't worked with him.
Right, I had not never worked with him. He was. I couldn't think of. I find it hard to think of American men that are just regular men. You know, we have some great screen personalities in this country. I mean, nobody's better than Jack Nicholson or Robert De Niro, Al Pacino. You know, it's very. But we don't have just regular men. You know, in the European tradition, like, you know, Michel Piccoli, Yves Montand, Jean Gabin. You know, where they're not gangsters or gunfighters or sexy in that real tough way. You know, where they're attractive. And I couldn't think of an American male. The closest I could think of, the closest would have been Dustin Hoffman, and he was, you know, very busy and miles away on something, and I don't even know if he would have been exactly right, but he's the closest I could think of, and so I had to use an Englishman, but I had not wanted to use an Englishman. I had wanted to use an American, you know, and then once I broke that barrier and said, well, I'm going to use an Englishman, then it became obvious to me that I wanted to use Michael Caine because I've always loved him. You know, he's funny and he's terrific actor, you know. So,
Yeah.
but I resisted using an English person for.
For a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm about to go and see Barbara Hershey.
Ah, you're lucky.
I'm lucky.
Yes, you're lucky. She's one of the most attractive women that you'll ever see. She's just great. Yeah.
Should I pass that on?
Oh, you can. She knows. She knows. I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just think she's just, you know, a wonderful actress and an incredibly attractive woman. I mean, in fact, I had to cast somebody. I was thinking, who can I cast where as soon as she's on the screen, the audience will know immediately why this guy is consumed with desire for and consumed with obsession. And I couldn't think of who. And then Barbara Hershey is someone that I'd wanted to work with for years. I had offered her a part years ago in Annie Hall, a small part, but you know, I didn't know her that well. And you know, she lived in California and didn't want to come east then. But she's just a wonderful, you know, she's
and
wonderful.
obviously you work with her again.
Oh, I would in a minute. Yeah, she's just great.
Just one last question about the actual writing. When you write, do you sort of write one draft of the screenplay all the way through, or do you tend to write sort of scene by scene, and maybe, you know, scene 1 and then scene 6? And
Oh
then
no,
scene
straight
24?
through from line 1 right through to the end. That was one of the things that I learned as a television writer.
Right.
That where I was taught that very clearly. Don't write out of sequence. I usually write with a pencil and paper for a few pages and then put it right on the typewriter and then more pencil and paper and sometimes I can write straight onto the typewriter. I can't if I'm writing prose. When I was writing for the New Yorker magazine, I could only write with a pencil. I have to real close to the pad. But when I'm writing characters to speak, I can walk around the room and say the parts out loud and say, you know, oh, come in, put down your hat, and type it down, and walk around the room doing it. But
male and female, you
yeah,
sort of try both.
All, but generally speaking, most of the time, I'll just take a yellow pen and write a scene out, and then transfer it right away to.
So, how many drafts would you do normally of a film? I mean, will you?
Writing?
Yeah.
Usually before I begin, like 2 and a little fixing. You know, I write one draft and then immediately rewrite it and fix it, and then I let them start budgeting it and we start looking for locations. And as the months of pre-production go, I modify it tremendously according to what I find. You know, I'll write that he takes it on a date to Coney Island. Or in Annie Hall, this was the perfect one. I'd say, you know, they live in Flatbush and his father works in a grocery store. And then while we were looking around in Brooklyn, I saw this house underneath a roller coaster. And, you know, I had no idea of the existence of the thing, so immediately I went home that night and got out the script and, you know, changed it for that. And this happens all the time. You know, or I'll cast an Englishman and go back and change it. Yeah.
So where do you become conscious when you're shooting the film originally that you're going to need to reshoot certain parts, or does that, and therefore rewrite part of the film, or does that come only after you get a rough cut? or a fine cut?
Both. What happens is I reshoot sometimes day to day. I mean, I come in here and look at the dailies, and most of the time, thank God, they're okay. And I say, fine. If they're not okay, I say, before we chop up the set or before we move, let's reshoot this. So I do a lot of reshooting as I go along. I don't let stuff get put away in my vault that isn't usable, because I've done that before when I first started, and it was a mistake. I would say, oh, this is good enough, this is good enough. Then when I had to put the picture together, it was terrible. And so I make sure that when I put it to bed at night, the stuff is good. And then when I put the picture together, I realize how fooled I was even then. I see the thing and I say, oh, God, the writing didn't work, this character you hate, this is not funny, and I thought it would be. This looked so great in dailies, and in the run of the picture it moves like molasses, and then I go out and reshoot again, and again if necessary.
Really? You will actually reshoot a scene a number of times?
Yes, a scene and new material very often, a number of times.
How do the actors react to this?
Well, that's the advantage of being a small New York operation. The actors are me, Diane Keaton, Mia Farrow, Tony Roberts, whoever, and I just call them up on the phone. I mean, we're all friends, and I just say, let's do this scene over. I got a great idea for a new scene, and it's not like if I was working with Jack Nicholson and Warren Beatty or something, I'd have to call them up and say, are you doing a new film? Where are you? Can you come back? And but this was just a breeze, and everybody worked like that on Hannah. Even Michael Caine made himself. I didn't have to do too much reshooting, but he made himself available. Max von Sydow came back from Europe because this was part of the deal going in.
You always explain to them?
Yeah, we told them going in, and we budget for it. We put a certain amount of money away so that I don't have to go to the film company and say, I need another $500,000 because I made mistakes. We allot for mistakes
in the beginning. Yeah.
And people are always saying to me, don't understand how you can do that, and I'm always saying, I don't understand how you can't do that. It would be like a novelist pulling a novel out of the typewriter, first draft, and saying, I can't go back and change anything.
Here
this
it is.
It. It's unthinkable. And it's just as unthinkable in a movie. You do a movie, you put it up and you look at it, and maybe once in your life you'll hit it lucky, but 99% of the time, it's going to be full of mistakes. And,
One last question. Which of all the characters that you've played on the screen would you allow, if you like, that comes closest to you?
Well, they're all, of the ones I've played, they're all pretty close to me to an extent. They're all fictional, but they're close to me. I mean, certainly in Annie Hall, while I made up the incidents there, the character is fairly close to me. I mean, they always express my philosophy, my point of view. I am a hypochondriac. I am against drugs. I am against rock music. I got a lot of.
You're still a hypochondriac. I suppose once a hypochondriac, just about always a hypochondriac.
Yeah, there should be. Someone was talking about this, Hypochondriacs Anonymous, because it's a very painful thing to be a hypochondriac. To suddenly see a little bump on you or a bug bite or a God knows what, and suddenly immediately cut right to the worst. And other hypochondriacs I've talked about, it's given them an enormous amount of anguish. And so there are people that have, or at least one person spoke to me about forming Hypochondriacs Anonymous, where, hypochondriacs can calm other hypochondriacs and say, you don't have, brain cancer because you got a headache this morning, but to the hypochondriac, it's very real and very painful.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Not fun at all.
No, I don't mean to be laughing either.
No, I still am a hypochondriacal to a large degree, and all the things in my films about me, the philosophies are true. What throws people when I always say they're not really autobiographical is that the events are all made up. I mean, people thought, for instance, in Annie Hall that was the story of my relationship with Diane Keaton, when in fact there's nothing like that. I don't come from Coney Island. My father didn't run an event at Coney Island. I didn't meet Diane that way. She didn't leave me and move to California. None of these things happened. In fact, half of the things were made up by Marshall Brickman, who collaborated on the script with me. But they think it's autobiographical.
Yes, of course.
Because what's autobiographical is the point of view that's stated.
that's why I was saying about the dinner parties. You see, that's the point that you've provoked people to, if provoke's the right word. That people sort of sit there and they go, that you provide so much material in films because they're about relationships and people identify with them, that they automatically want to talk about it. And then out of that comes, but Woody must be like this.
Well, it's the points of view.
Yeah, of course.
That is what they're responding to, I think.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Because I've never been shy about stating them in films. I always give my conclusions to everything. In fact, if anything, it's a weakness of mine to be didactic.
Do you think it's a weakness, though? Because it's honesty.
I can occasionally moralize, and it gets annoying to people. I will occasionally in a desperate effort to make my point of view known.
Even this is on film or
on film,
right?
I moralize, and people will say to me, just don't put the message in the mouth of the person. Let us watch the story and get our own, understand what you're saying from that. Don't that is a weakness of mine, and I have to. I've tried to correct it. I have to keep trying to correct it.
In recent decades, of course, Woody has been the subject of a number of acrimonious allegations involving his former partner and children. Now, I'd just like to point out before anyone attacks me over this interview, these are only allegations. They have never been proven, Woody has never been charged with anything, and he deserves the presumption of innocence. Unless you have undeniable proof, then I suggest you keep your thoughts on the matter to yourself. On the other hand, you're free to criticise his writing, acting, directing and movies as much as you like.